500 guests watched Celeste carry the final serving platter to the main table. Her hands were steady. Her back was straight. Her apron was still tied at her waist because there hadn't been a single moment in the last 4 days to take it off. 4 days, not 3. 4. She had started cooking on a Tuesday, before the sun came up, before the rest of the house was awake, before even the birds had decided the morning was worth acknowledging. She had cooked through Wednesday, through Thursday, through the small, breathless hours of Friday morning when the whole world was asleep and the only sounds in that massive kitchen were the low hiss of the oven and the quiet movement of her own hands. And she had done all of it alone. When she set the last platter down at the head table, the room erupted. 500 people. Applause rolling from one end of the Grand Meridian Ballroom to the other like a wave that didn't know where to stop. A woman near the center of the room stood up from her chair without thinking about it, the way you stand when something moves you before your brain has time to give you permission. Then the man beside her stood, then 3 more tables, then a section near the back that couldn't even see Celeste clearly, but stood anyway because the room told them something worth standing for had just happened. Celeste wiped her hands on her apron. She reached for the one empty chair at the head table, the chair with her name card still folded against the base of the crystal glass, her chair. The chair that had been placed there weeks ago when the seating chart was drawn up, before everything, when her name still meant something in this room. And that is when Marcus moved. Her husband crossed the floor in 4 steps, his hand closed around her wrist, not gently, not quietly, right there in front of 500 people who had just eaten every single thing she had made with her own hands over 4 consecutive days without sleep, without help, and without a single word of thanks. He pulled her sideways, hard enough that she had to take a step to catch her balance, and then he leaned in close enough that his cologne, a cologne she didn't recognize, sharp and expensive, something she'd never bought him, mixed with the warm air between them. His voice came out low. But the room was quiet enough that the first 4 tables heard every word like a bell struck in an empty church. The kitchen is where you belong. Not at this table. Servants don't sit with guests. 500 people. Not one of them spoke. Forks stopped mid-air. A woman at table 12 put her hand over her mouth. A man near the bar turned slowly away from his conversation, his drink halfway to his lips, and set it back down without drinking. The string quartet at the far end of the ballroom let their last chord dissolve into nothing and didn't start the next song. The silence was the loudest thing in the room. And into that silence, from the main entrance, walked a woman named Janelle. She came through the double doors like the room had been expecting her. Hair pinned up with a precision that takes 2 hours to make look effortless, a gold dress that cost more than Celeste's entire grocery budget for the month. She moved through the crowd with a practiced ease, one hand trailing the back of chairs as she passed, not because she needed the support, but because she wanted people to look. They looked. She reached the head table. She pulled out the chair, Celeste's chair. She sat down, crossed her legs, and set her clutch on the table with the settled certainty of a woman who believes she has already won. Marcus smiled at her from across the room. Not a small smile. The wide, warm, undisguised smile of a man who had forgotten, or simply stopped caring, that his wife was still standing 10 feet away. And then Marcus's mother, Dolores, who was seated 2 chairs from Janelle, reached over without a word, without a flicker of discomfort in her expression, and straightened the napkin beside Janelle's plate, smoothed a crease in the linen, and said, softly but clearly enough, "You look beautiful tonight, sweetheart." 500 people in that ballroom. Not one of them stood up. Not one of them said her name. Not one of them walked toward the kitchen door where Celeste was standing with her apron still on and her wrist still warm from where Marcus's hand had been. Celeste stood in the kitchen doorway. She looked at the room. At the tables she had planned, at the food she had cooked, at the husband who had just erased her in front of every person whose opinion had ever mattered to either of them, at the woman now sitting in her chair, at the mother-in-law who had smoothed the napkin with a smile like she'd been rehearsing that gesture for months. And then Celeste's eyes moved across the room to Marcus's private table near the far wall. The one where his leather attaché case sat, locked, monogrammed in brushed silver, propped between a stack of birthday gifts and a bottle of aged bourbon. Celeste smiled. Not a shattered smile, not a wounded smile, not the smile of a woman who has just been broken in front of 500 people. A quiet smile, a patient smile, the smile of a woman who has been waiting for exactly this moment and knows with complete and total certainty how the rest of the night ends. Every single person in that ballroom looked at Celeste Whitfield and saw a woman who had been humiliated, who had cooked for 4 days and been dragged to the kitchen, who had been replaced at her own table, who had been told in front of the world that she was a servant. But the woman standing in that doorway wasn't broken. She was the only person in that building who knew what was inside that attaché case, and what she was about to do with it was something Marcus Whitfield would spend the rest of his life wishing he could take back. Stay with me, because this story starts 7 years ago, and it does not end the way you think. 7 years before the night of the party, Celeste Okafor was standing in the parking lot of a church gymnasium in southeast Atlanta, loading her grandmother's cast-iron skillets into the back of a borrowed Civic. She had just spent the afternoon feeding 80 people at a community fundraiser, alone. Every dish made from scratch, every portion calculated by hand. The mac and cheese had run out first. It always did. She was lifting the last skillet when a man in a pressed shirt and no tie walked over and said, without preamble, without a hello, without even introducing himself first, "I've been to catered events that cost $10,000 that didn't taste like what you just made." She looked at him. He looked at the skillet. "You should be doing this professionally," he said. "I'm serious." His name was Marcus Whitfield. He was 34. He owned a mid-sized commercial real estate firm that was doing well enough to have business cards with raised lettering. He came back to the church the following week. And the week after that. He always found her at the food table. He always stayed until the last dish was packed. 6 weeks in, he told her that she had a gift that deserved a bigger stage. 8 weeks in, he told her she was the most capable woman he'd ever watched work. 3 months in, he asked her to marry him in her grandmother's kitchen, standing on linoleum flooring, with a ring that wasn't large and a look on his face that was. She said yes. They married on a Saturday in March. 70 guests, collard greens, fried catfish, and a coconut cake Celeste baked the night before in a borrowed commercial oven. Every person at that wedding said it was the best meal they'd ever eaten at a wedding. Marcus said it was the best meal he'd ever eaten, period. Their first home was a 3-bedroom in Decatur with a kitchen that got afternoon light and a dining room they turned into Marcus's home office because the business needed the space and Celeste didn't mind. She cooked, she kept his books, she built his client entertainment schedule from the ground up, hosting dinners in their home every other Thursday, small gatherings at first, 6 people around a folding table with cloth napkins she ironed herself, then 12, then 20, then events that required renting chairs and borrowing every serving dish owned by 4 different neighbors. Deals got closed at those dinners. Marcus told her so. He told her she was his secret weapon. He kissed her temple after the guests left and said every single time, "I couldn't do any of this without you." And Celeste believed him. She believed him the way you believe someone who has given you no reason not to. When Marcus's firm landed its first major commercial contract, a $4.2 million mixed-use development on the Northeast Corridor, they celebrated with a dinner for 2 in their kitchen. Celeste made the meal. Marcus opened the champagne. He looked at her across the table and said, "This is ours, Celeste. Everything I build from here is ours." She remembered that sentence later. She would remember it in an attorney's office, in a county clerk's filing room, in the long silence of a night when she sat alone with documents spread across a kitchen table and let herself feel, just once, how much it cost to have believed someone. Then she put the feeling away, and she got to work. But first, the attaché case. Marcus bought it 2 years into the marriage, butter-soft leather, charcoal grey, with his initials pressed into the side in brushed silver. He carried it to every meeting. He kept it in the car when he was home. He kept it beside the bed when it was in the house. And 18 months ago he started locking it, not just closing the clasp, locking it. A small combination lock threaded through the side buckle, a combination he set himself and never mentioned. Celeste asked about it once. She handed him his coffee one morning, watched him turn the dial with his back slightly angled toward her, and said, "New lock?" He didn't look up. "Business materials, nothing you need to worry about." That was the first sentence he had ever said to her that carried a door in it. A door that opened in only one direction, away from her. It was not the last. The changes were not dramatic. That is the thing no one tells you about the slow erosion of a marriage. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with a scene or a confrontation or a moment you can point to and say, "There, that is when everything changed." It comes in increments so small you almost convince yourself you're imagining them. A charge on the shared credit card, dinner for two, a restaurant in Buckhead she'd never been to. The name of the restaurant was familiar because Marcus had once mentioned it as the place where he'd closed his first big deal years before they met. The kind of restaurant you don't go to alone. She filed that away. A phone face down on the kitchen counter, vibrating at 11 p.m., silenced before the second pulse, so quickly she would have missed it if she hadn't been standing right there rinsing a dish. She filed that away. A name mentioned at the dinner table with the casual ease of someone who has practiced mentioning a name casually. Janelle pulled some great research on the Westbrook property, sharp eye for detail. Said while reaching for the bread. Said without looking up. Celeste passed him the butter. She filed that away. Then came Dolores. Marcus's mother had always been present in the way that certain mothers are present, visible at holidays, gracious at birthdays, impossible to read and therefore impossible to argue with. She had been polite to Celeste for 7 years. Not warm, not cold. Polite, the way a person is polite when they are reserving judgment for a moment that hasn't arrived yet. That moment arrived 9 months before the party. Dolores began visiting weekly, every Tuesday, always with something in a dish that didn't need to be brought, a pound cake, a jar of preserves, and always with something in her mouth that landed like a velvet-wrapped blade. Celeste, Marcus mentioned the Harrington dinner didn't go as smoothly as the others. You might want to think about doing a formal plating next time instead of family style. His clients are moving in different circles now. You look tired, sweetheart. A man like Marcus needs a partner who can keep her energy up. These circles he's moving in, they notice things. I don't want to overstep, honey. But your hair? Marcus mentioned something about wanting to host a gallery event, and those women dress a certain way. Just something to think about. Celeste listened to every word. She thanked Dolores for coming. She offered her coffee. She walked her to the door and waved from the porch and went back inside and wrote every single thing down. Not on her phone. In a small spiral notebook with a green cover that she kept in the drawer beside the kitchen sink, the place in a house where no one ever looks twice. Because Celeste Okafor Whitfield was not a woman who reacted. She was a woman who documented, and a woman who documents everything is the most dangerous person in any room she enters. 4 months before the party, on a Sunday evening when Marcus had flown to Charlotte for what he described as a due diligence meeting, Celeste was walking past the door of his home office when she noticed the light was on. She stopped. Marcus never left the office light on. She pushed the door open and saw the attaché case sitting on the desk, unlatched, the combination lock hanging open on its chain like a mouth that had forgotten to close. He had left in a hurry that morning. He had gotten a phone call while packing, and his whole body had changed, his voice dropped, his movements quickened. And he had carried the case out to the car, and then come back in for his travel mug, and then gone back to the car again. And she had heard the trunk open and close twice. He had left the case behind. He had driven to the airport without it. Celeste stood in the doorway of the office for a long moment. She looked at the case. She looked at the empty room. She looked at the painting on the wall, a print of a Harlem Renaissance piece she had chosen herself, hung herself, centered herself using a level app on her phone because Marcus said he'd do it, and never did. She walked into the office. She opened the case. Inside, property contracts, an LLC formation document, a stack of bank statements paper-clipped together, and, beneath all of it, a manila folder with no label. She opened the folder. Her hands went still. She had the kind of stillness that comes not from calm but from the body's instinct to stop moving when the mind is processing something too large to process, while also doing anything else. Inside the folder were 5 property deeds, 5 properties she and Marcus had purchased together over the course of their marriage. Properties she had visited with inspectors. Properties she had negotiated repair credits on. Properties whose rental income she had managed, tracked, deposited, and reported on their joint tax returns for years. Every deed had been retitled, every single one. The new ownership entity was called Whitfield Morrow Capital Group, LLC. The co-owner on every document was listed as Janelle Morrow. Celeste read each page twice. She checked the dates. She checked the notary stamps. She pressed her fingertip against the raised seal on the corner of the first deed and felt it press back against her skin like a fact that was not interested in being argued with. She turned to the next document, a marital settlement pre-agreement, pre-drafted, her name at the top, Marcus's attorney's letterhead at the bottom. The language was formal and dense, but the intent underneath the language was simple enough for anyone to read. If she signed, she would forfeit all equity claims on every property transferred into the LLC. She would exit the marriage with her personal belongings, her car, which was 4 years old and still had payments on it, and nothing else. The signature line had today's date pre-printed beside it. She turned to the last page. A bank statement. Not Marcus's, Dolores's. Dolores Whitfield had co-signed a personal asset loan for $88,000. The loan had been used to fund a lease deposit and 6 months advance rent on a luxury apartment in a high-rise on Peachtree Street. The apartment was listed under the name of Janelle Morrow. The loan was dated 11 months ago, 2 weeks before Dolores had started her Tuesday visits. 2 weeks before the comments about Celeste's hair and her energy and the circles Marcus was moving in. Dolores hadn't been offering advice. She had been laying groundwork. The way you soften soil before you uproot something, the way you loosen a foundation before the walls come down. Celeste closed the folder. She placed every document back exactly as she had found it. She photographed each page first. 31 photographs total, taken with her phone's camera at a consistent angle, in the same order as the documents, so that every image was clear and every sequence was traceable. Then she locked the case, placed it back on the desk at the same angle it had been sitting, wiped the latch with the hem of her shirt, and she sat in Marcus's desk chair and looked at the painting she had hung on the wall. The painting she had chosen. The painting centered with a level app because he said he'd do it and never did. She sat there for 50 minutes. She did not cry. She did not call anyone. She did not throw a single thing, though there were things within reach worth throwing. She let the information settle. The way flour settles in a sifter, the way sediment settles at the bottom of water when you stop shaking the glass. Slowly, evenly, until the composition is clear. Then she picked up her phone and called a number she had looked up 3 weeks earlier and not yet dialed. A woman answered on the second ring. "Tatum Law Group, this is Sylvia." "I need to speak with Attorney Rose Tatum," Celeste said. Her voice was even. "I have a property fraud matter and I need to speak with someone today." Attorney Rose Tatum was a compact and deliberate woman with close-cropped silver locks and reading glasses on a beaded chain, who had spent 22 years taking apart the financial architectures of men who believed they were smarter than their paper trails. Celeste sat across from her the following Monday and placed her phone on the desk, face up. She had organized the photographs into a shared album. 31 images, every document, every deed, every notary seal, every page of the pre-drafted settlement agreement, every line of Dolores's bank statement. Attorney Tatum scrolled through them in silence. Her expression didn't change, but her jaw tightened incrementally with each page, the way a vice tightens, a slow, controlled, purposeful pressure. She set the phone down. She removed her glasses. "These LLC property transfers," she said, slowly, "require spousal consent for jointly titled real estate under state marital property law. I do not see your signature anywhere on these transfer documents." "That's because it isn't there," Celeste said. Attorney Tatum looked at her for a moment. "He filed 5 property transfers without your knowledge or your legal authorization. That constitutes constructive fraud on the marital estate. Every single one of these transfers is legally voidable. We can challenge them, freeze the LLC's operating ability, and have each deed reversed." Celeste nodded. "I know. Do you want me to file immediately?" "No," Celeste said. "Not yet." Attorney Tatum studied her the way a person studies something they're not entirely sure they've understood correctly. "Tell me what you're thinking." Celeste told her about the party. Marcus's 45th birthday. The Grand Meridian Ballroom, which Marcus had booked because it seated 500, and he wanted every client, every colleague, every community figure, and every person whose respect he'd ever cultivated to be in one room watching him be celebrated. She told her she had agreed to cook for the party herself. Every dish. Not because Marcus had asked her to, he had assumed she would, but because Celeste had agreed before she opened the attaché case, and after she opened it, she had decided that keeping that agreement was the most important thing she could do. She told her she had been composing the guest list. She told her that certain names on that list were not there by accident. Attorney Tatum uncrossed her arms and leaned forward slightly. "You're not planning a birthday party, Mrs. Whitfield." Celeste looked at her without blinking. "You're planning a court of public record." "I'm planning," Celeste said, "the last meal I will ever cook for that man, and I want him to remember every bite." Attorney Tatum was quiet for a long moment. Then she picked up her pen. "Tell me every name on that guest list and why." Over the next 3 months, Celeste moved through her life with the surface appearance of a woman preparing her husband's birthday party, and the underlying precision of a woman dismantling everything he thought he had secured. She sent 500 invitations. Marcus approved the guest list by glancing at it for 40 seconds while eating breakfast and saying, "Looks good. You didn't forget the Chambers Group people, did you?" She had not forgotten. She had called the Chambers Group partners personally to make sure they confirmed. He didn't notice that she had also called Bishop Aldridge, the man who had officiated their wedding and whose moral authority in their community was older and heavier than any business relationship Marcus had. Bishop Aldridge RSVP'd the same day. He didn't notice that she had invited Reginald Holt and Carter Beaumont, his 2 most significant investment partners, the men whose capital had financed the Westbrook deal and the North Pines development and 3 other projects Marcus couldn't have completed without them, and had personally written each of them a handwritten note on cardstock asking them to come as guests of honor. He didn't notice that Dorothy Asante, the president of their homeowners association, and the woman whose opinions spread through their community faster than any news outlet, had not just RSVP'd, but had called Celeste to ask if she needed any help. And he absolutely did not notice that one name on that guest list wasn't a name at all. It was a title, paralegal representative, Tatum Law Group. Now, that person would arrive without announcement, sit near the back, carry a leather portfolio, and wait. Meanwhile, Marcus grew careless the way men grow careless when they believe they have won. He started taking calls from Janelle in the living room. Not in his office with the door closed, the way he had for months, but right there, on the couch, while Celeste cooked dinner on the other side of the wall. He laughed differently on those calls, looser, warmer, the way he used to laugh with her. One evening, Celeste heard him say, "She's so deep into this party planning, she doesn't even see it. Honestly, it's almost sad how focused she is." And Janelle's voice, through the speaker, muffled but audible. "She's actually going to cook for 500 people by herself?" Marcus, "That's what she does. Give her a kitchen and she disappears into it. I barely have to manage her." Celeste was standing on the other side of the kitchen wall, a wooden spoon in one hand, a pot simmering on the stove. Her face didn't change, not a twitch, not a breath she didn't mean to take, not a single micro-expression that would have told anyone watching that she had heard every word. She turned back to the stove. She adjusted the heat. She stirred the pot with the same slow, deliberate motion she always used, and she thought about the 31 photographs on her phone, about Attorney Tatum's legal filings already drafted and waiting, about the guest list and the paralegal in the back row and the folder she had returned, exactly as she found it, to a locked case whose combination Marcus thought only he knew. She stirred the pot, and she waited. The cooking began Tuesday at 4:15 in the morning. Celeste stood in the Grand Meridian's catering kitchen, a kitchen she had toured twice, measured once, and mapped completely in her head before she ever turned on a burner. And she began. For 500 guests, she had calculated the following. 180 pounds of slow-braised oxtail started first because it needed the longest time. 120 pounds of smothered chicken thighs, 90 pounds of shrimp and grits, the grits made from stone-ground white corn she had sourced from a mill in South Carolina. 200 pounds of collard greens, simmered in smoked ham hock stock she had prepared at home the week before and transported in sealed containers. 80 cast-iron skillets of cornbread, baked in 4-hour rotations because the ovens could only hold 20 skillets at a time. 60 pans of baked mac and cheese with a breadcrumb and sharp cheddar crust that formed a shell so golden it crackled when you pressed it with a spoon. And the centerpiece, a 5-tier celebration cake. Each tier a different flavor. Red velvet, lemon pound, chocolate fudge, spiced carrot, and vanilla bean, frosted in smooth ivory cream cheese buttercream with hand-pipe details she executed at 3 a.m. on Friday morning in the quiet of the empty kitchen, working from memory, not from a template, because the hands that have made something 100 times don't need to be told what to do. The cake took 11 hours to complete. By Friday evening, when the first guests began arriving, Celeste had been awake for nearly 4 full days. Her feet had been on that kitchen floor for 90 of the last 96 hours. She had eaten a total of 7 actual meals during that time and approximately 14 cups of coffee. When the kitchen staff she had coordinated, hired by her, scheduled by her, briefed by her, began moving dishes to the serving stations, one of the young women pulled her aside and said quietly and with genuine feeling, "Miss Celeste, I have worked with professional caterers my whole career, and I have never seen anything like what you just did in 4 days. Never." Celeste thanked her. She tied the last apron string, she picked up the final serving platter, and she walked out into the ballroom. The Grand Meridian Ballroom held 500 people in its full configuration, and it was full tonight. Round tables dressed in ivory linen, each with a low arrangement of white garden roses and greenery at the center. Crystal glasses catching the chandelier light, place cards in calligraphed script. Marcus had approved the calligrapher, but Celeste had written every card herself at the kitchen table on a Sunday night 2 weeks before. The dance floor gleamed at the center of the room. A 14-piece orchestra occupied the raised platform at the east end, currently playing something warm and unhurried that filled the space without dominating it. Every detail in this room existed because Celeste Whitfield had thought of it, planned it, sourced it, confirmed it, and followed up on it. Every dish on every table was a thing she had made with her own hands over 4 consecutive days without adequate sleep or a single word of acknowledgement. When she walked that final platter to the head table, the applause started at table 6 and spread outward until it had covered the entire room. Someone stood, then a whole table stood, then the room, in sections, got to its feet for a woman carrying a serving dish in an apron, and the sound was the kind of sound that doesn't require an announcement or a stage. A man near the center said to no one in particular, "Lord have mercy, who is this woman?" Marcus was standing at the head table when Celeste arrived, wine glass already in hand. The wide smile of a man who had decided some time ago that everything in this room existed because of him. He didn't look at Celeste when she set the platter down. He was looking at the room, at the applause, receiving it the way you receive applause that isn't for you, and have simply decided, through an act of sustained private delusion, that it must be. Celeste set the platter down. She reached for her chair, and then Marcus's hand was on her wrist, hard, turning her sideways before she had fully processed that he had moved, pulling her toward the service hallway door at the side of the room, efficiently, like a thing being relocated rather than a person being handled. His voice was low, but the room had gone quiet in the way rooms go quiet when something wrong is happening, and no one yet has the words for it. The kitchen is where you belong, not at this table. Servants don't sit with guests. He said it, and then he released her wrist and turned back toward the table as if that was simply a thing that had needed to be handled and had been handled the way you redirect a misplaced item to its proper shelf. The room cracked, not loudly, not with a gasp, with a silence so complete and so sudden that you could hear ice settling in water glasses. You could hear the nervous shift of a chair somewhere near table 20. You could hear the sound of a woman pressing her napkin against her mouth to keep something in. The orchestra did not begin the next song. The servers near the stations stood still, trays in hand, eyes finding the floor. And through the main entrance doors, exactly as Celeste had expected, exactly at the time she had arranged, Janelle Morrow walked in. Gold dress, hair perfect. Moving through 500 people like she was the reason they were all assembled. She reached the head table. She sat in Celeste's chair. She crossed her legs and placed her clutch on the white linen and looked around with the expression of a woman who does not ask whether she belongs somewhere. She simply decides that she does. Marcus's mother, Dolores, 2 seats away, reached over and straightened the napkin beside Janelle's plate with the smooth, practiced, unhurried motion of a woman who had been rehearsing that gesture in her mind for months. "You look beautiful tonight, sweetheart," Dolores said. 500 people. Not one of them stood. Not one of them said her name. Not one of them walked to the service door where Celeste was standing with her apron on and her wrist still carrying the ghost of Marcus's grip. 500 people who had just eaten the food of Celeste's life. 4 days of her body, her skill, her sleeplessness, her love for the craft, sat in their ivory-draped chairs and said nothing. And Celeste looked at all of them. She looked at the head table. She looked at Marcus, already back in conversation with Reginald Holt, performing the version of himself he had been rehearsing all year. She looked at Janelle, settled in her chair. She looked at Dolores, hands folded in her lap, expression serene. She looked at the attaché case, sitting on the gift table against the far wall. And then Celeste Whitfield did the thing that no one in that room expected. She untied her apron. folded it in 3 clean folds, the way you fold something you intend to keep. Set it on the kitchen counter beside the pass-through window. She washed her hands, she dried them with a cloth towel. She fixed her hair using the faint silver reflection of a stainless steel warming tray, because that was what was available, and Celeste had always made use of what was available. Then she walked back into the ballroom. She did not walk toward the head table. She walked to a small table against the back wall of the room. A 2-person table, set but unoccupied, positioned far from the music and the toasts and the light, the kind of table that exists at every large event as an afterthought and at which no one ever sits by choice. Celeste sat down. She placed the linen napkin across her lap. She picked up her fork. And she began to eat her own food with the kind of quiet, immovable dignity that made the entire room feel slightly loud. The shift in the room didn't happen all at once. It started with glances. A woman at table 11 leaned toward the man beside her and spoke quietly with her eyes tracking to the back wall. A man near the bar turned his chair in a new direction without appearing to notice he was doing it. 3 women at table 19 exchanged a look that required no translation. The orchestra played on, but the room's energy had tilted on its axis. Something was off in the picture Marcus was constructing, and 500 people could feel the wrongness of it, even if no one had yet named it. A woman named Sandra, Celeste's oldest friend, the woman who had helped her carry the cast-iron skillets out of that church parking lot 7 years ago, stood up from table 8 and walked the full length of the room to the back table. She bent beside Celeste's chair and said quietly and precisely, "That cake is the most extraordinary thing that has passed my lips in 15 years, and you deserve to eat it wherever you want to sit." She didn't leave. She pulled out the other chair. Then came a couple from table 5, plates balanced on forearms. Then a woman from table 14 who had attended 3 of Marcus's firm dinners and eaten Celeste's food each time and told her so. Then a small knot of people from table 22, moving quietly but with purpose across the room like a tide that has decided on its direction. What had been the emptiest table in the Grand Meridian Ballroom was becoming, slowly and unmistakably, the center of the room. Marcus noticed it mid-sentence. He was talking to Reginald Holt about the North Pines development when his eyes tracked across the room and found the cluster of people gathering at the back table. The shift in his face was not visible as a frown or a panic. It was visible as a tightening, a rubber band pulled exactly 1 revolution too far. He raised his glass. "Could I just have everyone's attention for a quick—" But the room didn't fully turn. A portion turned. The rest stayed where it was, facing the back, facing Celeste. Marcus lowered his glass. He leaned toward Janelle and said, barely moving his lips, "Why is she sitting back there like that?" Janelle didn't answer. She was watching Celeste too, and the expression on her face, the expression that had been a settled, victorious, entitled smile since she walked through the front doors, had shifted into something else, something that looked, if you looked carefully, like the first real calculation she had made all evening, because Janelle Morrow had walked into this room believing she had already won. And for the first time tonight, she was not entirely sure. Dolores, 2 seats away, was staring at the centerpiece flowers as if she were trying to locate herself within the petals. Her hands were folded too tightly in her lap. The knuckles showed it. Celeste, at the back of the room, caught Marcus's eye across the full length of the Grand Meridian Ballroom. She held his gaze. 1 second, 2, 3. The kind of 3 seconds that expand to fill the space between 2 people and hold things in them. History, paperwork, 31 photographs, 4 sleepless days, and the memory of a man who once stood in a kitchen and said, "This is ours, Celeste." Then she looked away. Not down, away past him, toward the window at the far end of the room, where the city lights pressed against the glass, as if Marcus Whitfield had not earned the 4th second. It was close to 10:30 when Marcus tapped his glass with a butter knife. The room gave him what remained of its attention, some of it genuinely, some of it from social reflex, some of it from the kind of politeness that exists separately from respect. He thanked his business partners by name. He thanked the venue, he thanked the orchestra, he thanked his mother for always knowing what I needed even before I did, and his voice carried the warmth of a man who had no idea what that sentence had just cost him in the room. He thanked Janelle for her vision, her partnership, and her belief in what we're building together. He raised his glass high. He did not say Celeste's name, not once, not the woman who had cooked 180 pounds of oxtail and 200 pounds of collard greens and 60 skillets of cornbread and a 5-tier cake she had piped by hand at 3 a.m., alone in a commercial kitchen on 4 days without sleep. He did not say her name. He erased her the way you erase a line item on a budget sheet, efficiently, without sentiment. Sandra at the back table had her hand pressed flat against the tablecloth so hard the linen compressed beneath her palm. Bishop Aldridge, 3 tables from the front, set his water glass down without drinking. Reginald Holt said nothing, but he stopped writing the check in his mind that he had been mentally drafting for the North Pines expansion. The applause for Marcus's toast was thin, polite, the kind of applause that a room produces out of obligation when it doesn't want to cause a scene but has already, privately, made up its mind. And then, before the sound could fully settle, before Marcus could sit back down and return to the comfort of being the center of his own evening, Celeste stood up. She rose from the back table the way a person rises who has been waiting for exactly the right moment and has arrived at it without hurry and without apology. Straight back, steady hands at her sides. Not performing composure, possessing it, the way you possess something you've earned through repetition over months of waking up and choosing not to react. "If I could have just one moment," she said. Her voice was clear, pitched at exactly the volume that carries to the back of a large room without appearing to raise itself. The voice of a woman who has thought carefully about the acoustics of the space she is standing in. 500 people went quiet. Marcus's face went still. His hand tightened on the stem of his wine glass. He did not sit down. He did not speak. He looked like a man who has built his entire evening around a script and has just heard the first line of a different one. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," Celeste said. "I spent 4 days preparing the food you ate this evening. Every dish, every garnish, every skillet of cornbread, that 5-tier cake. I made all of it, and it means a great deal to me that you came, and that you stayed, and that you ate." She paused. The silence in the room was the kind of silence that listens. "I also have a birthday gift for Marcus, something I have been preparing for quite some time." She walked toward the gift table at the far wall. Marcus's eyes tracked her the way a man tracks something he cannot stop and has only just realized he cannot stop. His feet didn't move. His hand found the back of his chair. He needed something solid, and that was all that was available. Celeste picked up the attaché case. She turned the combination dial. The numbers she had photographed from a different angle weeks ago, sitting in his desk chair at a different angle, having simply noticed that when Marcus turned the dial, he always arrived at the same position with the same 3-turn motion. She had worked out the combination from the photographs. She had practiced it at home on a combination lock she bought at a hardware store. She had known it for 3 weeks. The latch opened. The sound it made as it clicked carried across 500 people in that ballroom the way a single note carries in an empty cathedral. Clean. Final. Unmistakable. Marcus made a sound that was not quite a word. Celeste reached into the case. She pulled out the manila folder. She held it up at a height that allowed the people in the front 12 rows to see that it was a folder full of documents, official documents, the kind with stamps. "Most of you know," Celeste said, "that Marcus and I have spent the last 7 years building something together, a business, a home, a set of investments, properties we researched together, purchased together, maintained together. I kept the books, I managed the tenants. I negotiated the repairs, I filed the taxes. She opened the folder. 5 months ago, without my knowledge and without my legal consent, Marcus transferred every jointly owned property we hold into a new LLC, 5 properties, 7 years of shared equity, gone, filed with the county without my signature. A sound moved through the room, not a gasp, something larger and quieter than a gasp, the sound of 500 people inhaling at the same moment and forgetting to let go. The LLC is called Whitfield Morrow Capital Group. The co-owner on every transfer document is a woman named Janelle Morrow. Celeste turned slightly toward the head table. She didn't point. She didn't need to. The same Janelle Morrow currently sitting in my chair. The room didn't move. Celeste kept going. She told them about the pre-drafted settlement agreement, document designed to be presented to her after tonight's party, when she was meant to be too grateful and too emotionally softened by the evening to read carefully. She told them what the document would have stripped her of: every property, every equity share, every dollar of the 7 years she had spent in service of a business that had used her name and erased it. She told them about the apartment on Peachtree Street, the $88,000 personal loan, the co-signer. That loan, Celeste said, and her voice remained exactly the same, did not harden, did not waver, did not perform anything, was co-signed by Dolores Whitfield, Marcus's mother, the same woman who spent the last 9 months visiting my home every Tuesday to tell me that my hair needed work and my energy was insufficient and I wasn't keeping up with the circles my husband was moving in. Dolores's hand went to her throat. She looked at Marcus. Marcus was staring at the attaché case as if it had just proved to him, conclusively, that the laws of physics are negotiable. The county clerk's office confirmed 5 weeks ago, Celeste continued, that every one of these property transfers was filed without the required spousal consent documentation. Under state marital property law, every transfer is legally defective. The LLC holds title on paper, it holds nothing in law. Every property reverts to joint marital ownership under the original title. She set the folder on the table beside the case, both open, both visible. The Whitfield Morrow Capital Group exists only on paper that was never worth the ink Marcus used to sign it. Marcus's mouth opened. His lips moved. No sound arrived. He looked like a man who has spent a year preparing a performance and has arrived at the stage to find that someone else has already given it. And then, from the back of the room, a woman stood up. She was dressed simply. Dark blouse, tailored slacks, a leather portfolio against her side. She had been sitting alone all evening at a table near the east wall, noticed by no one, which was exactly how Celeste had arranged it. She walked to the front of the room with the calm, even pace of someone who has done this before and found it unremarkable. She placed a sealed envelope in front of Marcus on the head table. "My name is Priya Stevens, paralegal with the law office of Rose Tatum," she said. Her voice was professionally flat. "This envelope contains preliminary divorce filings, a motion to freeze all assets held under Whitfield Morrow Capital Group LLC pending judicial review, and documentation of a forensic audit currently underway on all marital financial accounts." She stepped back. "Mr. Whitfield, you have been formally served." Janelle pushed her chair back. The legs scraped across the hardwood of the Grand Meridian ballroom floor, and the sound was the only sound in the room. She stood, grabbed her clutch, and moved toward the main exit in quick, unsteady steps that looked nothing like the entrance she had made an hour earlier. But Bishop Aldridge was near the door, not blocking it, simply standing there, the way a man with 40 years of moral weight stands in a doorway, which is differently than other men stand. The weight of every sermon he had ever given about truth and about the cost of choosing otherwise was in the way he looked at Janelle. Not with condemnation, with something heavier, recognition. She stopped. She turned around, walked back to a chair against the wall, sat down with her clutch pressed to her chest and her eyes fixed on the floor. Marcus turned to his mother. Dolores Whitfield was looking at her own hands as if she had never seen them before, as if the hands that had adjusted Janelle's napkin and straightened the linen and welcomed her with, "You look beautiful tonight, sweetheart," belonged to a person she did not yet know how to account for. She didn't look up. She didn't speak. The woman who had spent 9 months softening Celeste's confidence like soil before extraction sat in her chair and said nothing and looked at nothing and became, in the space of 30 seconds, the smallest person in a room of 500. For 10 full seconds, no one in the Grand Meridian Ballroom made a sound. The orchestra was silent. The servers were motionless. The candles burned at their quiet heights. Then Marcus leaned forward. His voice came out as barely a whisper, but the room was so completely still it carried to every table. "Celeste, we can talk about this at home." Celeste looked at him. She looked at him the way you look at someone when you have already said everything that needs to be said and have arranged for the paperwork to say the rest. "We could have," she said. 7 months ago, when I first noticed the lock on your case, we could have talked about it. You chose the kitchen instead." She picked up her folder. She walked to the back table. She sat down. She lifted her water glass and took a slow, deliberate sip and set it back on the linen with the precision of a woman who is finished. No one moved. No one spoke. The party was over. Marcus Whitfield just hadn't been told yet. The week that followed dismantled Marcus's professional world with the same patient precision Celeste had used to document it. Reginald Holt called Monday morning. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't deliver a speech. He said, "Marcus, I was in that room Saturday night. I ate food your wife cooked for 4 days, and then I watched you drag her to the kitchen. I have invested considerable capital in your projects because I believed your judgment was sound. I'm no longer able to hold that belief. The North Pines development will need new lead management." Marcus started to speak. Reginald said, "I was in that room. There is nothing you can tell me that I don't already know." The line went quiet. Carter Beaumont followed 2 days later. Same measured distance, same finality, different words, identical result. Marcus lost his 2 primary investment partners in 4 business days, men who had attended his firm's anniversary celebration, who had shaken his hand at closings, who had been seated at his birthday party eating food made by a woman he had told to stay in the kitchen. Word moved through the community. It always does. It moved through the church directory and the neighborhood association email chain and the parking lot conversations after Sunday service. Bishop Aldridge made no public statement. He did not need to. Marcus received a letter on official letterhead informing him that his role on the church advisory board was being placed under review. The letter was 3 sentences. Janelle Morrow's employer, a commercial real estate brokerage with offices on 3 floors of a midtown high-rise and a reputation it spent considerable resources maintaining, flagged her name during a routine internal review triggered by the court filings that were now, technically, public record. She was called into a meeting on a Wednesday morning. She walked out 45 minutes later with a cardboard box and no severance agreement. Her contract had been released, which is the professional term for the kind of ending that leaves a stain that doesn't wash out of the next interview or the one after that. She called Marcus that evening. He didn't answer. She called again the next morning. He blocked her number. She texted from a different phone. He blocked that one too. Janelle Morrow had walked into the Grand Meridian Ballroom like a woman who had already been given the room. She had been discarded the way someone discards a tool when it has caused more damage than use, without explanation, without a call returned, without a word of acknowledgement that she had ever mattered. She had entered thinking she was replacing Celeste. She exited learning that what Marcus was capable of doing to Celeste, he was equally capable of doing to her. The only difference was that no one smoothed a napkin for Janelle on her way out. Dolores called Celeste 3 times on Sunday. Celeste let each call ring until voicemail. Dolores left one message. Her voice was careful and thin, the voice of a woman performing innocence for an audience she can no longer see clearly. Celeste, honey, I think there's been a misunderstanding about my involvement. I was simply trying to help Marcus with some financial planning. I had no idea what the funds were being used for. I hope we can sit down and talk. Celeste listened to the voicemail once. She did not save it. She did not call back. Dolores called Marcus. It was the first time in 40 years she had needed something from her son that she wasn't sure he could give her. She asked him to fix it. She told him the family was unraveling. She told him she had not fully understood what she was part of. Marcus raised his voice at his mother for the first time in his life. He told her she had no right to call, that she had made everything worse, that she had walked into his home every week for 9 months and undermined his wife, and she needed to understand that everything that was now happening could be traced, in part, directly back to those Tuesday visits. Dolores said nothing on the other end of the line. Then she hung up. She did not call back. The relationship that had held its shape for 40 years without a single public crack had cracked all the way through in the space of 10 days, the way something structural fails, holding, and then all at once. Marcus drove to the house on a Thursday evening. He parked in the center of the driveway, both spaces out of pure habit, the unconscious habit of a man who has always assumed there is enough room for him. He tried the door. It didn't move. An envelope was taped to the frame. His name in Celeste's handwriting, the same steady, deliberate hand that had written 500 place cards in calligraphy 2 weeks ago on a Sunday night. Inside, Attorney Tatum's cover letter, the divorce filing, the asset freeze, the forensic audit now underway on all accounts he had believed were insulated, the LLC frozen by court order pending the voidable transfer determination which the attorney's cover note indicated was expected to proceed in Celeste's favor within 60 days. Marcus stood on the porch of his own house, holding a letter that told him everything he had spent the year constructing was now being taken apart the way he had tried to take apart his marriage, methodically, legally, and without warning. He walked back to his car, sat in the driver's seat with the door open for a long moment. The attaché case was on the passenger seat. He reached over and unlatched it out of habit. He didn't know why. His hands did it before he thought to stop them. The case was empty. Attorney Tatum's office had filed a document request with the county clerk 3 weeks ago. Every original document that had passed through that case was now part of a legal record. The case itself held nothing. Marcus sat in his car on his own driveway and looked at the empty leather interior and the silver monogram and understood, with the particular clarity that only arrives when there is nothing left to distract you from it, that he had built the instrument of his own undoing and carried it with him everywhere and locked it carefully every night. And the woman he had told to stay in the kitchen had simply waited until he left it unattended. 8 months passed. Celeste moved into a house she chose herself. A craftsman bungalow on a street lined with oak trees whose roots had lifted sections of the sidewalk in small, stubborn arches, the kind of street that has been lived on for generations. 3 bedrooms, a sunlit kitchen with eastern-facing windows that caught the morning light at an angle that turned everything inside it gold by 8 a.m. She signed the papers with her own name. She paid for it from her portion of the divorce settlement, which had returned to her every dollar of equity Marcus had attempted to reroute. All 5 properties, their full assessed value, plus a monetary award reflecting the forensic audit's findings on 7 years of marital financial contributions that had never been formally credited. Attorney Tatum had said, on the morning the settlement was finalized, he built a case against himself and carried it around in a locked bag. You just waited for the right time to open it. Celeste had thanked her and walked out into a Tuesday morning that smelled like rain and possibility and something she recognized distantly as the return of her own life. On a Saturday, in late October, Celeste cooked again. Not for 500 people. Not for a room full of business partners and church members and people whose opinions Marcus needed to maintain. Not for an audience, not for a performance, for 11 women who had shown up. Sandra, who had been the first person to cross the room and sit beside her that night. 3 women from the church who had sent groceries to her door during the weeks she didn't feel like leaving. 2 neighbors who had stopped by not to ask questions, but simply to sit. Celeste's cousin from Savannah, who had driven 3.5 hours without being asked and stayed 4 days. 4 others who had known her before Marcus, who remembered what she looked like when she was only herself and not someone's wife, someone's cook, someone's managed thing. The table was set with sunflowers from the garden she had planted in September, which had bloomed faster than she expected. A small speaker on the windowsill played Gladys Knight, because Celeste always said that Gladys Knight understood what it meant to love someone completely and still possess the knowledge that your own life is worth more than the loving. The front door was propped open. The screen door caught an October breeze that smelled like dried leaves and the first edge of winter, and something sweet rising from the oven. On a small brass hook beside the front door hung Celeste's apron, the one she had worn the night of the party. She had washed it by hand the week after, pressed it flat with a hot iron, and hung it there where she would see it every time she came in or went out. Not as a wound she was keeping fresh, as a marker. As evidence that a woman can carry 4 days of sleeplessness and 7 years of erasure and a room full of 500 people who said nothing, can carry all of it and still walk out the other side with her hands steady and her back straight and her recipes intact. When the women arrived, the bungalow filled with the kind of sound that doesn't perform itself, laughter that starts low and builds without permission. Sandra told a story about a parking lot incident that made 2 women have to set their glasses down. Celeste's cousin from Savannah got into a loud disagreement with the neighbor from 3 doors down about whether cornbread belongs in cast iron or a cake pan, and the argument was conducted with such genuine passion and such complete affection that it nearly knocked a jar of honey off the counter. Celeste laughed. A real laugh, the kind that starts somewhere deep and central and arrives without announcement. A laugh that surprised her in her own kitchen, the way good things surprise you after a long time without them. She hadn't heard that laugh from her own mouth in years. She had been so busy cooking for other people that she had forgotten what it felt like to be hungry for her own life. That evening, after the dishes were done and the last guest had hugged her at the screen door and driven away into the dark, Celeste sat on her front porch with a cup of ginger tea. The street was quiet. The oak trees moved slightly in the cool air. The light from her kitchen window spread out across the porch boards and the front steps and part of the yard in a gold that was soft and entirely hers. A car appeared at the end of the street, dark, moving slowly. It slowed further as it approached her house, stopped. Marcus was behind the wheel. He sat there for a long moment. Through her kitchen window he could see the table still set with sunflowers, the apron on the hook beside the door, the warm, full light of a room that had been laughed in that afternoon and still held the sound of it. He could see the shape of a life she had built in 8 months that felt more real and more inhabited than anything they had built together in 7 years. He sat with that for a long time, his hands on the steering wheel, the passenger seat empty, no attaché case, no documents, no plans, no angle, no next move. Then he pulled away from the curb. Slowly. The way a man drives when there is nowhere he is expected and no one who is waiting for him to arrive. Celeste didn't see the car. She was looking at the oak trees, at the way the streetlight caught the lifted sections of the sidewalk where the roots had pushed through, at the stubborn, quiet persistence of things that are rooted deeply and will not be moved. She sipped her tea. She let the night settle around her like something chosen. Celeste Whitfield never raised her voice that night. She never threw a plate. She never begged. She never screamed into the phone at 2 a.m. or made a scene in a parking lot or gave Marcus the satisfaction of knowing how deeply she had felt any of it. She cooked. She documented. She waited. She planned. She photographed 31 documents and memorized a combination and sat in an attorney's office and said, "Not yet," with the calm of a woman who knows exactly when the moment is and is not afraid to let it arrive in its own time. She fought back the way certain women fight, not with fury, not with noise, with patience, with paperwork, with the unshakable understanding that a woman who has been underestimated has been handed, without the other person knowing it, the most powerful thing available: the element of surprise. Marcus had spent a year building a case against himself and locking it in a bag he carried everywhere. Celeste had simply waited for a night when 500 people were watching. And patience, real patience, the kind that is backed by evidence and executed with precision, is not passivity. It is the most powerful strategy in the world. If this story reminded you of a woman you know who stayed quiet when the world expected her to collapse, share it with her. She needs to hear that her silence was not weakness. It was architecture. She was building something. She was always building something, and when she was ready, the whole room found out.